Eagles Entertainment.
Eagle Eye in the Sky is fueled by Gatorade, the official sports drink of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Anything that move, I don't care who it is. Let's go. Give me everything you got. Play fast, play hard. Let's meet these boys tonight in their house. It's party time. It's party time. There we go. Touchdown!
You are listening to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Now here's your host, Fran Duffy.
That's right of the week. We've got a wild card game to break down as the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, continues. I'm Fran Duffy, and as always, I think we've got a great show for you here on episode number 385. At the top of today's show, we've got Chalk Talk, where I chat with Greg Cosell from NFL Films so that we can break down Sunday's wild card matchup between the Eagles and the defending Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Bucks. These two teams met back in week 6, but there have been a lot of changes with both of these teams since that point. We're going to break it all down under the scope of this Sunday's matchup right at the top of the show. Before we get there, a couple of things I want to make sure we hit on. Number one, make sure you head on over to our Apple Podcast page. Leave us a rating. Leave us a comment. If you've got a question about this team or the status of it moving forward, any question you've got at all, that is the place to leave it. We will answer it here on an upcoming episode of the podcast. And also, make sure you are subscribed and you get the podcast sent to your phone every single week. You don't even need to do anything. It gets sent to your phone automatically. Thanks so much to everybody that has left us your support over on our Apple Podcast page. Also, while you're over there, make sure you subscribe to the Journey to the Draft podcast. Look, we are on the cusp of draft season, right? It's January. It's 2022. The draft is just 4 months away. The Senior Bowl just a couple of weeks away. The Shrine Bowl the week before that. So we are getting closer and closer and closer to talking about these draft prospects in earnest. And we've been doing that for months over on the Journey to the Draft podcast. So if you want to get a head start on who the top names are, who's going to be talked about with mock drafts and the top 10 rankings, now's the time. Jump on over. The Eagles have 3 first-round picks in the 2022 draft. Get a head start on who those names are going to be by subscribing to the Journey to the Draft podcast, wherever podcasts can be found. That said, let's start this podcast. I'm excited to sit down with Greg Cosell. It's going to be a fun discussion here in Chalk Talk.
Let's get down to business. It's time for Chalk Talk.
All right, excited to dive into this Eagles-Bucs matchup here with my friend Greg Cosell from NFL Films. And Greg, I guess before we turn our attention to Sunday's game against the Tampa Bay Bucks for the wild card round, I want to really quickly reflect on what I thought was a really unique opportunity for this Eagles team, one that most NFL teams don't usually get. And I actually made the comparison on the kickoff show the other night on Saturday night to a college team in a bowl game scenario where you really get a good chance from an evaluation standpoint to get a really good look at the bottom third of your roster, including so many practice. I mean, there were 12 practice squad players seeing significant snaps in Saturday's game. We don't need to get into the nitty gritty of the performance and the outcome, but I thought just a really good opportunity for the team to be able to get eyes on all of their young players.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it was a good way to do that. I was particularly interested in watching Milton Williams, someone who we've talked about, who does play as part of the rotation when everybody's playing. But they had him in this given game play kind of the Josh Sweat position, where he lined up in that 5-man front as kind of the 4-4-I-5 technique, and as an edge pass rusher in the 4-man D-line, which we haven't seen a lot of this season. Normally he plays inside, and I think they probably wanted to get a look at him on the edge rushing the quarterback because he's very athletic. We saw that with his measurables at his pro day. He's a very athletic kid, and I think they wanted to see him do that. But you watch him, and we've talked about this, Fran. What continued to stand out was, in the run game in particular, was his point of attack leverage, his strength. There were snaps in which he controlled and displaced offensive linemen. I would imagine the Eagle organization and the coaching staff, I'm really excited to see the development of Milton Williams because I think he's going to be a really good player.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting just reflecting back, obviously watching the game Saturday night, but you see the backups and the deep reserves. I don't even think saying backups is a testament to exactly what we saw. I mean, a lot of guys you just don't see during a regular season game playing significant snaps, going toe-to-toe with Dallas for a large chunk of that game. And to me, it's so big, not only for the scouting staff to get eyes on some of these guys. I mean, look, Jason Huntley gets promoted to the 53-man roster today. Does that happen if he doesn't get those significant snaps last week? I don't know, but that's like the most recent case where you could say, hey, that helps. But even when you get to this spring, when the team is making decisions on free agency and draft prospects, when they get to the summer and you get a sense of final cutdowns, you're going to look back at this film, and it's going to weigh on you because in preseason you're going up against other guys that are on the bottom end of the roster. Here you got a chance to see young players, draft picks, undrafted free agents, guys that have bounced around from team to team that have kind of been journeymen, and this is their last shot. Getting that chance to go up against a division winner in the Cowboys, just a really cool, unique opportunity for everybody involved.
And I think the other guy that I was happy to see, because as you know, and I think we agreed on his evaluation coming out of college, even though we opted out of 2020, I was really happy to see Kenneth Gainwell. I thought he showed real well. I think he's someone to keep an eye on going forward. I mean, obviously, I don't know what their plans are. We're still in the season. We have a playoff game to talk about momentarily. So we're still in the 2021 season. But just going forward, who knows about a Jordan Howard or a Boston Scott, or we know Miles Sanders is going to be here, but to me, Kenneth Gainwell is a really fascinating player. And I thought he showed well on Saturday night.
Yeah, I thought he did some really good things, and we can get into the nitty gritty there. But I think that more people are tuned in right now to get your thoughts on this game going up against the Tampa Bay Bucs. And we can start on whatever side of the football you want, Craig. I'm just going to lay it out this way. How do you like the Eagles' chances on Sunday afternoon? I'll just lay it out that way. How do you like the Eagles' chances, and I'll let you go from there.
Well, I don't know if I want to give it away right at the start. So let's talk about a couple of matchup elements to the game first. We know what the Eagles are at this point offensively. Whether they're exactly that I will get to. But we know up to this point that they're a running football team. We know that Jalen Hurts up to this point has not been asked to drop back an awful lot in games by choice. I think it was you who had mentioned to me that he's only had 30 or more actual pass attempts in one game, which was the Giants' loss in the last 7 or 8 weeks, correct? Yep. Whatever the number is.
And that line of demarcation happened shortly after this game against the Bucs, by the way.
Correct. So we know what the Eagles' offense has been and what they likely have to be to a certain degree. But they're playing against a Buck defense that is very, very good with their front group. Now, this is a defense that will play with a 4-man front, a 5-man front. You see a lot of what we call 5-2 with 5 across and 2 stacked backers. And what they like to do there is they like to sort of play with a reduced front at times where they cover the center. And that will be a very intriguing matchup in this game. You could easily make the argument Jason Kelce's a Hall of Famer, but we all know that one of the things that's not his strength is when he has to play with power against a big, big nose tackle. And that's a matchup. For those who don't always watch the ball, if they want to watch a matchup that's really worth watching, look at Jason Kelce versus Vita Vea. That's going to be a very intriguing matchup because Vea will be the zero technique head up on Kelce in their 5-man front. And then, of course, they have Ndamukong Suh, another big man who's very mobile, very active, as Vea is, by the way. So the interior, when you're talking about the Eagles' inside zone run game, which is a foundation of what they do, Fran, that's going to be a fascinating part of this game. We know the Eagles have been built on the run. They've been phenomenal running the ball really until the Washington game, putting aside the Dallas game, not really relevant for the purposes of our conversation now. But really, they dominated pretty much every opponent they played running the ball until the Washington game, when 2 really good interior players in Payne and Allen gave them some issues. So it'll be fascinating to see how this plays out. So I'll stop there for a moment, and then we can kind of continue. You can jump in here.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned the Washington game, the Week 17 Washington game, because and just kind of thinking about this matchup, the Week 15 Washington game, which was at Lincoln Financial Field. That was the one that was bumped to Tuesday night due to the COVID issues surrounding the football team. Looking at that matchup and just how the Eagles were able to move the football on the ground, that was an outstanding offensive performance on that Tuesday night. The Eagles did a great job of, especially early on, leaning on some of those perimeter runs.
Yes.
You get Payne and Allen, those guys chasing sideline to sideline. And then late, you had Jordan Howard kind of come in as the closer and really bang it between the tackles. And I kind of wonder if that's a formula that we'll see. Obviously, when the Eagles played the Bucs back in Week 6, that was a different philosophy, different offense philosophically, right? I mean, they only ran the ball. I think what did the running backs have 2 or 3 carries in the first half? My guess is that will be passed on the opening drive. Yes. It would be the plan, right?
So one thing I'm thinking about now as we talk a little bit about this game, and as we were joking before we started this podcast, I don't believe anybody from the coaching staff will be giving me a call, momentarily, but I wonder if this is a game where you think maybe in terms of a little more gap scheme, because gap scheme gives you angles. And angles gives you an opportunity to kind of, almost to use your term, lean on people, get leverage on bigger players. And we know, for instance, how good Dickerson and Mailata are when they have angles, when they down block. So again, I think the Eagles' run game will likely be expansive and multiple, as it always is. But I'm just wondering if the sort of the ratio between zone and gap scheme could shift a little to gap scheme, just because the angle blocks, the leverage blocks, might be a better fit against the Veas and the Sues, than against, the smaller, quicker line.
Yeah, and when you say gap scheme, you're speaking more oftentimes with a puller. You'll see power, you'll see counter, and more examples just so that to paint that visual.
And you get to, and what happens there? You're right. I should have, because it's you and I talking, and sometimes I forget. But so what happens when you get a puller from one side? On the play side, you get the double team, and the double team allows you to get the angles and to get 700 pounds of man on a D tackle, whether it's a 3 technique or a 1 technique, or a nose, however they line up. So just something that I was thinking about in terms of what the approach might be.
Yeah, and I think too the other element of this is that again, going back to the differences between this Eagles team and the one that played the Bucs in Week 6, is that the Eagles leaning into that QB run game and have been much more creative in terms of how they're utilizing Jalen Hurts, who now actually has that extra week of rest in Week 18, having not participated in that game against Dallas. So that ankle injury, you'd hope, is one step closer to being 100%. Nick Sirianni kind of referred to that, was like, hey, look, we wanted our guys to be full bore, ready to go. They're hopeful that they'll have Miles Sanders and Jordan Howard for this game. Obviously, Gainwell, Boston Scott, everybody healthy here for this matchup. And so I do wonder, and I almost reflect back to another divisional game. Remember that first game against the New York Giants, the QB counters, the QB powers. We saw a number of those concepts. I wonder how much of that we will see in this matchup as well.
And I think you make a great point. I was going to make that point as well, that I think with Hurts now ideally being healthy, which I'm sure he is, now it's time to lay it on the line. I would think that you would see the QB run game being a major part, because you hit on something that I think is really important when you start it. I think they want to get those big guys playing sideline to sideline. We know Devin White can run.
Yep.
I don't know Levante David's status.
So basically, the Bucs come into this week with a couple of guys, key players on injured reserve. Leonard Fournette, who they shut down at the end of the regular season, right. Hopeful that he'll be back. It sounds like he will be good to go. Levante David, Bruce Arians said on Monday, a little bit questionable as to whether or not he will be ready. That one's a little bit more up in the air. So it may not be Levante David. It'll be more of Kevin Minter and KJ Britt as well in there.
Right. So, but the point being, we know Devin White can run, but the point is, you want to get those big guys having to play sideline to sideline. So I would expect the run game to also attack the perimeter. And that includes Jalen Hurts. So I think Jalen Hurts, to me, will be a big factor in the run game this week. And I think he should be.
The interesting thing, I mean, when the Eagles prepared to play the Bucs back in Week 6, we talked about how they were number one. And you talked. This is a great run defense historically since Todd Bowles has been there. You look at the personnel they've got. This is a really good run defense. If you look just pure volume, they've stopped the run at a very high rate. I think what has been interesting, though, we've seen this especially in the second half of the year with Levante David out. They're averaging actually a full yard more per carry with David out of the lineup, a huge loss. And then also Vita Vea, he's been in and out of the lineup. He's healthy now, but he was out of the lineup for a bit. And that also kind of hurt their ability to be able to stop the run. One interesting note, just kind of going through some numbers, Greg, while they are still pretty high, top 10, top 15 in, yards per attempt and things like that, explosive runs, big play runs, they're 30th in the NFL on explosive run percentage allowed. They've gotten gashed by certain teams, and even just recently against the Jets just a couple of weeks ago. So it seems like there are some cracks that the Eagles can take advantage of.
I remember the game against the Colts a number of weeks ago where the Colts came into the game believing, hey, we can't run the ball, and they didn't run, and they actually threw it well. And then in the fourth quarter, they just went to the running game on a drive, and they just gashed them. So you're right. It has not been quite the same, but again, they have very good players, so you don't want to just assume. So I think the Eagles' run game has to be really tactical, and it will be, because they have to run the ball to some degree.
Well, and the big thing is that, whenever we talk about a Todd Bowles defense, what's the big thing we go back to is all the pressure packages. And so if you're able to run the football, and we get into some of those same old axioms, right? Run the ball well, stay ahead of the sticks, don't get into third and long against Todd Bowles in this pressure package. That's the last thing you want.
So here's my next thought, and you tell me what you think. I think that they're going to know that at some point they're going to have to throw the ball in this game. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, at some point you are going to have a third and long here and there. You're going to have to deal with it.
So instead of getting into those situations, which you'll get into some of them, and they're inevitable in every game, do you change your ratio a bit on first down and maybe be proactive throwing the ball? Throwing the ball when you know what the defense will be, you have a much better idea of the fronts, because all those pressure fronts and multiple fronts come out of nickel. The base fronts, you want to throw against base fronts where you're more likely to get coverages that tendency coverages. So maybe this is a game where in so many words, you say to Jalen Hurts, hey, you're gonna make some throws here. We're confident in you. We're gonna come out. There's gonna be 1st and 10s where you're gonna throw the ball and feel that, hey, because this way you're not going to get the pressure. You're going to get predictable looks, both from a front and coverage standpoint, and you attack instead of feeling like, oh, let's see if we can run. And if we can't, then we're asking our quarterback, to have to make 3rd and 8 and 3rd and 9 throws. And you really don't want to be in that situation. Now, the thing about Jalen Hurts is his legs always become a factor in those situations.
Yep.
The Bucs are not a high percentage cover one defense, but they do like to play a lot of 2-man. Yep. I don't know how much 2-man they would play against Jalen Hurts.
No, they lead the league in 2-man coming into this game, and I can't imagine we'll see too much of that in this one.
No, I would agree. So it'll be interesting, but again, just my opinion based on film study and what I know about defense and the looks and the fronts and the coverages is it's much more tendency predictable on 1st and 10 from a defensive standpoint. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Eagles try to be a little proactive throwing the ball.
Especially if Levante David is healthy, they're actually a top 10 team in terms of base defense percentage. They did. This is the opposite of what, I remember we talked last week about the Cowboys. They live in their sub. They're big nickel.
Right,
that's what they do. I think they've run like 20 snaps of base defense all year. Probably actually, I think less than that. It might be single digit. But this defense, they are willing to go with 4 down and 3 stacked backers. I think when you look at the way that they want to try and attack, those coverages are going to be there. My question for you is this. The last time these two teams met, you saw a bunch of backups in the secondary. The Eagles were unable to take advantage of that. Carlton Davis was out. Jamel Dean was out. Sean Murphy-Bunting was out. Richard Sherman was in starting, and he got hurt on the opening drive. But those guys are now back in this game. We'll see about Jamel Dean. He tweaked his hamstring on Sunday, so he's kind of up in the air. But I just want to get your thoughts on that trio of corners because they were big for the Bucs last year in that Super Bowl run, especially in the playoffs. You had Carlton Davis, Dean, and Murphy-Bunting.
Yeah, and in their base, it's Murphy-Bunting and
outside,
Davis on the outside. Yeah. And then Dean comes in as the outside corner in nickel. They don't play much dime at all. So he comes in nickel as the outside corner with Murphy-Bunting moving inside. If he can't go, it'll be Pierre Desir, who has been in the league. They'll be perfectly happy with him because, hey, let's face it, the other Eagle receivers besides Devonta Smith, I don't think they look at them and say, wow, that's a big issue. We're really worried about that. So if it's Pierre Desir, they'll be okay. Like we said, they don't play a ton of cover one. They play more zone. They're a more zone-based defense. I would not expect us, as we said, to see them play a lot of 2-man in passing situations because of Jalen Hurts. But I think their corners are pretty good. I mean, I think, they normally don't travel, and I don't think they would travel in this game because I don't think Carlton Davis is a good matchup for Devonta Smith. Just, Davis is a big physical corner, and I don't think they'd put Murphy-Bunting on him to travel. So I think they would just play sides.
The one thing I'm interested in, last year, Greg, they play. I know, and Todd Bowles in his past has been more man coverage based. Do you think because of the injuries that they've suffered this year, they had to lean more into playing more zone, or do you think that that's kind of a shift philosophically for Todd Bowles?
That's almost impossible to know.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, just because of all the injuries, and sometimes you have to adjust and make do. He did not have, even when Richard Sherman could play, he's not really a man corner.
No.
So I think he probably did it out of necessity. We do know they're a heavy blitz team.
Yep.
It'll be very interesting to see what kind of pressures, because clearly if you're going to blitz, you can't give Jalen Hurts the ability to get a lane, because then you're just out of bodies.
Yep.
Then you get the big runs. And that's the thing about quarterbacks that can do that, is they can demoralize you. When it's 3rd and 9, if you choose to blitz, you cannot let Jalen Hurts run for 15 yards.
No.
We'll see how he sort of structures his pressures. Teams do different things when you get to the playoffs, as you know. So it's easy to say they've been, the average person would probably say, Todd Bowles is coming. Well, we don't know that. I mean,
right.
Might think he is based on what he's done during the season. But they really haven't faced a quarterback like Jalen Hurts.
No, they had Taysom Hill.
Taysom Hill, but that's a totally different offense.
Yes, right.
So there's no real comparison or analogy with their season to say how they would play against Jalen Hurts. And like you said, the whole week 6 thing, I don't put a lot of stock in that right now.
Yeah, I mean, just even going back, there was no Dallas Goedert in that game, no Lane Johnson in that game. It was a short week. We know where the Eagles were stylistically at that point, just a different set of circumstances. Real quickly, before we go over to the other side of the ball as well, that safety duo, I think is kind of underrated in the league. Second-year guy, Antoine Winfield is a really good player when he's been out there.
Whitehead's a good player.
Whitehead's a good player. I was just going to get your thoughts on those two guys.
Oh, no, Winfield, I think most people know about his 2nd-round pick. He was a really good player as a rookie last year, right? Wasn't he a rookie last year?
He was. 2nd-round pick out of Minnesota last year.
That's right. Yeah. A player I think we both like coming out of college. I think he's a really good player. I think he's to me, he's not used the same way, but I think he has kind of Buda Baker traits in the sense that he can do a lot of things well. He's aggressive. He's active. He sees things. Plays with his eyes really effectively, isn't asked to do, let's say, what Buda Baker is asked to do overall, but I think he's that style of player. Whitehead's a really good, he's an unknown player to a lot of people, but he's been their starter now for a couple of years under Todd Bowles, and Bowles has had a history of getting a lot out of safeties. I remember going back to when he was the D coordinator with Miami. I'm probably going back 12, 13, 14 years. And you'll remember the name, he had a safety named Jeremiah Bell.
Sure,
and for a couple of years, he was a really good player.
It's actually not a bad comp for Whitehead either. I think him and Whitehead are kind of similar in a lot of ways.
They might well be, and I think he gets a lot out of safeties. And Whitehead, he's a very good blitzer. They use him in their blitz packages at times. He's the one who tends to play more in the box than Winfield. He's a physical, aggressive player.
One other group we didn't hit too much on. We talked about the two inside guys with Vita Vea and Ndamukong Suh, but we got to talk about these edge guys as well, Greg, with Jason Pierre-Paul, Shaq Barrett, Joe Tryon, the rookie first.
Tryon has had a very good rookie season.
Yeah. So just, when they get into 3rd down, they're a factor, but also a run game, especially JPP, and Tryon is a high effort player as well. And what he could bring to the run game as well.
And they move Tryon all over.
They do.
So it's going to be interesting because look, Todd might feel, and that's why just by looking at track record this year and blitz percentage doesn't mean that's going to happen in this game. He might see how it goes early on with Barrett and Pierre-Paul and Tryon working against Mailata and Lane Johnson. Look what they did last year in the Super Bowl, where they basically rushed 4 most of the game. Everybody said blitz, blitz, blitz. He didn't do a ton of that. He may see how that goes before he decides whether he wants to bring pressure.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be one of the things to watch early on, not just in the game, but then even as we get into the second half, we'll see how that changes as the game progresses. Let's get over to the opposite side, Greg, and they've got a quarterback that can play a little bit over on that side with Tom Brady, a guy you've seen plenty of film on over the years.
I'm blown away by the way he throws a ball. Look, we know you don't have to be a power thrower with tremendous velocity to be a great quarterback in this league. But I'm just blown away by how well Brady is throwing the ball at this age. He throws with velocity. He can throw the deep ball. He throws with touch and pace. Really just from throwing a football and the nuances and the details of throwing a ball, there's few better than Tom Brady. I've said that I think Aaron Rodgers may be the best thrower I've ever seen. Brady's a different kind of thrower, but he can drive the football much more so than he's been given credit for, I think, throughout his career. And the one thing I've always believed about Brady we live in an era, Fran, where most of the people out there believe that to play quarterback in the NFL today, you have to have second reaction ability. Well, if you say that, and that may or may not be true, it's an easy thing to say, then you have to have an answer for Tom Brady. What's your answer for Tom Brady? You can't just say, well, he's great. That's not an answer. There's a process involved here. There's no better quarterback playing right now who wins more before the ball is snapped. He knows where to go before the ball snapped. And if by chance there's an old lineman gets beat, or you probably watched the game this week, in the first half, there were some snaps which were very interesting, although I'm not sure this is in Jonathan Gannon's arsenal right now, but there were some snaps against the Panthers, because it isn't Phil Snow's arsenal, with a lot of pressure fronts, disguise, late movement. They caught Brady a couple of times in the first half. I'm sure you noticed that.
Yeah, it's one of the plays. I'm going to be breaking that play, one of those plays down, actually, on the Eagles game plan this week.
Yeah, the second play of the game, I believe, the second drop back was a really interesting one to me, where they showed, I think it might have been a double mug. It was a pressure front, and then they dropped out into, I believe it was cover 2.
When he came and he wanted to go back to, is that the one we wanted to go backside to Cameron Brate?
I can't remember, but he ended up throwing it down the seam to Gronk, and it should have been picked off.
Okay.
But the point is I'm not sure that's in the Eagles' arsenal right now. Now, could it be? I'm sure it's in the playbook, but, obviously we know he's great, but my guess is the Eagles will still show up and Jonathan Gannon will still coach this week. So what you're trying to do is you're just trying to make Brady have to wait a beat. That's all you're trying to do. But you get into a really important matchup in this game, which is D-line pass rush versus Bucs O-line. Bucs O-line arguably is the best pass protecting O-line in the NFL. So that to me is such an intriguing matchup in this game.
I mean, it's fascinating just even like looking at the stats, Greg. If you don't even watch an ounce of the film and you say, all right, well, what do we know about Bruce Arians' offense? We know, hey, over the course of his career, wherever he's been, it's the no risk it, no biscuit. It's a vertical based offense, not quarterback friendly. But then you look and it's like, all right, well, that's what, and that carries out in the stats, right? I mean, they're second in the NFL in deep pass attempts. They're first in the NFL in explosive pass plays. Like I said, just not a QB friendly offense, because you have to hold on to the football, right, to be able to allow those routes to get down the field. No, that's not the case. You look at Tom Brady right now. I saw this stat coming into this week, Greg. This is from Next Gen Stats. 96% of his passes in the first 17 weeks came from the pocket, 96%. And he was one of the leaders in time to throw. The ball came out, I think it's under 2.5 seconds. No QB has more completions, yards, or touchdowns this year on quick passes where the ball comes out in under 2.5 seconds. And that is wild. And they're number one in sacks allowed. They're number one in hits allowed. They're number two in hurries allowed. They're third in pressures allowed. He's never touched. He operates from within that 6x6 box behind the center. And the ball's going to come out. And it's not just, hey, the ball's going to come out and it's going to go 3 yards or it's going to go 4 yards. They're vertical shot plays that just the ball comes out in rhythm.
Correct. But I guess until he learns how to run around a little, he won't be any good.
Right. Well, I guess that's the thing, too, is like, and we've seen this over the years, right? I mean, Tom Brady's been around long enough where you get all the, well, you can't play zone against Tom Brady because he's going to pick you apart. He's going to find the holes. Oh, well, you can't play man against Tom Brady because he's going to find the matchup. Oh, you can't blitz him because he's going to find the hole. Oh, well, you can't play the 4-man. You can't just sit back and play 4-man rush. So I want to ask you this. It seems like one team that has got, we're not going to say blueprint. We're not going to use that.
Talking about the Saints?
The Saints have done a nice job against him over these last couple of years that he's been in the division. And I think that watching those two games back this week, and even going back to last year, some of the things that they've done against him, I think they do a great job of exactly what you talked about. We saw from Carolina early on in this game was late movement in the pre-snap phase from the secondary, and then also mixing up front. Hey, it might be a 3 or 4 man rush, but before the snap, we're showing 5, we're showing 6, and then we're going to buzz out. We're going to drop guys out. You don't know who's coming, who's not. You're going to force you to think a little bit after the snap.
But here's what I will say, and that's why I said I don't know if that's in Jonathan Gannon's arsenal right now, because we haven't seen that kind of thing really from the Eagles this year much at all. That's part of Dennis Allen's, he's the DC for the Saints. That's part of what he does. That's part of what Phil Snow, the D coordinator for the Panthers, does. I think we've seen it a little, enough in spurts, though. I guess we haven't seen it over the course of an entire game, like what we've seen from Allen. Right.
I mean, there have been, I think there have been plays where we've seen, them line up and say, hey, here's a 5-man front, 6-man front, and it's actually only 3 coming, and we're going to get a free runner. There's the zone exchange blitz with TJ Edwards last week, a couple weeks ago rather, that sets up the Josh Sweat side. Oh, we've seen examples. It's just this game plan, are they going to cater that to do it?
But I guess I don't think of those just that. I'm thinking more along the lines of the true multiple front looks,
right?
Where you have a lot of pressure fronts. I know the Eagles line up with a lot of 5-man fronts, but that's kind of their base deal. That won't be abnormal to the Bucs. They won't look at that and think, wow, I'm seeing something I didn't expect. I'm talking about all those multiple front looks where people are in positions you don't necessarily expect them. And there's 6 people on the line of scrimmage and you don't know who's coming and who's not coming. There's certain teams that you and I know do that just as part of their deal. The Ravens do that. The Saints do that. The Panthers do that. I know I'm missing a few teams as well, but is it in Jonathan Gannon's playbook? Of course it is. Every coach has things like that in his playbook. The question is, will he do that?
Right.
And most teams will play zone behind that, because I think the Eagles will end up playing a lot of zone this week, because even though they're down receivers, and it's likely to be, it'll be Evans, who they'll move around. He does not line up in one place. It'll probably be Evans, Tyler Johnson, and Brashad Perriman. I still don't know if the Eagles truly match up well to play a meaningful amount of true man coverage.
Yeah, and that will be interesting to see, because obviously no Chris Godwin, who is such an important part of that offense, both obviously in the pass game and also in the run game as well. So no Godwin, no Antonio Brown, obviously. So you come into this, you mentioned Tyler Johnson, who has done a decent amount of work in the slot as well as outside. Brashad Perriman, who's had success for Bruce Arians in the past. That's why they are for this organization, I should say, in the past. But Cyril Grayson is another guy that they've brought up here. They've brought him up from the practice squad, and he's been kind of a key piece for them over these last couple of weeks. A speedster, a guy that can work vertically, someone to just keep an eye on. Scotty Miller is now healthy, so they're trying to get these guys back into the lineup. And
Scotty Miller can run. Grayson came out after 6 plays this week. It looked like an injury, so
that's something to keep an eye on. Yeah,
I'm not sure what his status is as we speak on a Monday night. But Miller's an interesting guy. He made a bunch of plays for them last year, and he can run. He's one of those guys you don't think about him, but he can run.
He's the one who caught that deep ball over Kevin King in the title game against Green Bay, right? The one just before half.
Yes.
So he had that big play last year.
I think what Jonathan Gannon chooses to do, and what he, and the other thing too is you have to feel your players are capable of that. And I'm not saying they're bad players. That's not the point. But you can have a great linebacker who's not a great blitzer. You can have a great linebacker who's not great man coverage. I mean, he has to decide, hey, yeah, in an ideal world, I would love to do X and Y, but I'm going to have to do Z instead, because I'm not sure if my players can execute X and Y at the level required to play against the greatest quarterback of all time. So that's why I'm so intrigued by this, because what we know is you can't just line up and play in the same thing, snap after snap after snap. You can't do that.
Yeah. One guy who did not play back in week 6, and I'm interested to kind of get your thoughts and see how he factors into this matchup, and he's a part of the discussion when you talk about the lack of receiving options at wide receiver, is Rob Gronkowski, because he's been very productive when he's been out on the field.
Yes.
I'm interested to get your thoughts on how you view that they'll use him in this game.
Well, another reason why I don't know how much man the Eagles can play, because who matches up to Gronk if you're going to play man?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I mean, they've kind of the Eagles have mixed and matched. It's been mostly I know Marcus Epps has been used in that role, but that's going to be the discussion.
Right. I mean, Gronk is really good on seam routes. He's really good on crossers or overs. Obviously, one thing I definitely want to mention is their use of him as the single receiver to the boundary. The 1-by-3 set where it's 3 wide receivers to trips. He's the boundary X. That's a really difficult matchup. You have to decide how you want to handle that. And then as part of that, they very often line up Mike Evans as number 3 to trips, meaning he's the closest receiver to the formation. And then you have to decide how you handle that. That's a tough deal.
What are the things on the table for a defense when you're faced with that kind of dilemma?
Well, if you're playing man, let's leave the man aside.
If you're playing man, that's
if you're playing man, it's you got him and whoever right. But if you're playing zone, then you have to decide what zone. What do you feel like? To me, and again, Jonathan Gannon's a lot smarter than I am with a lot more information at his fingertips than I have. But I don't think you want to give up the seams. And I think if you play a lot of single high, the seams become a problem unless you want to carry seams and then you open up routes underneath.
Right.
One thing about Brady is if you show him a 7-yard throw, he's going to throw that every single time.
And that's what he did. That's what he did back in week 6 against this team. The Eagles. I think Leonard Fournette had like 7-8 catches in that game.
Right, and he'll take it every single time. And because he doesn't make mistakes, he'll march down the field. He's one of those guys that you can say, "Oh, let's make him go 10 plays." He'll go 10 plays, and he'll complete every ball. So, to me, split safety quarters. You don't want to give up the seams. I think you might see a lot of that. You might see some quarter, half. Sure. Playing half to the boundary side. But I mean, I just don't think you can allow Gronkowski or Evans, if he's lined up at number 3 to trips, to work. Run down the seam. I just don't think you can allow that to happen.
Yeah, it's something to watch. And this isn't quite in the same milk of what we're talking about in terms of those checkdowns underneath. But they also ran a bunch of screens against the Eagles in that game in week 6 and really gashed them on those. They're actually second in the NFL in screen attempts this year. So whether it's to the receivers, to the backs, to the tight ends, the screen game, a big part of this offense. We mentioned Leonard Fournette there. Coming back from injury, I mentioned earlier, he did not play down the stretch here in the regular season. They're hoping they'll have him back here this week. What does his presence mean for this run game?
Well, I think with him, because he is a space runner, he needs room to generate velocity because he's a tight-hipped runner. He does not have quick feet and can find space. So what they've had a lot of success with, Fran, I'm sure you noticed this in studying them, is they like to pull and they like to get him on the perimeter so he can start to generate some velocity and some speed because he's not really an inside runner. We thought he was maybe coming out of LSU. It hasn't quite turned out that way in the NFL. So they use him that way a lot. You mentioned the receiving element. He catches a lot of balls that are not checkdowns. He catches them as a receiver who's just a short receiver who's part of the route combination. And if you give Brady that throw, he throws it to him. It's as simple as that.
Despite missing these last few games, he's actually third on their team in targets and by like a wide margin. He's got 62 targets. Antonio Brown had 42 by the time he was cut.
Because they throw it. Brady will throw it to him. But, that's one of the great things. One of the things that I think makes Brady great is he's not impatient in the pocket. That he'll take shots when it's appropriate. But if you give him those throws, he is going to take those throws, and all of a sudden it's 2nd and 2, and then they get a first down, and then it's 2nd and 2 again, and they get a first down, and all of a sudden they're in the red zone, and that's another area which we just need to mention because they're phenomenal in the red zone, and the Eagles have not been phenomenal in the red zone on defense.
Yeah, it's definitely a game within the game there. I think just looking at this matchup, it really does come down on this side of the football. Trying to find ways, as you mentioned, to get Brady to second guess, what he's seeing. If just hold it a tick longer, give your guys up front that ability. Because to me, you've got to find ways to be able to win up front, whether that's through skill or whether that's through scheme. They have to find quick wins up front with Fletcher Cox, Josh Sweat, that whole group.
You nailed it because you talked about the Saints, and I know you went back and looked at that, and then I'm very familiar with those games because we've dealt a lot with those games on the matchup show. Sure. One of the things that stood out in every one of those games is the Saints D-line was the more dominant unit over the Bucs O-line. And the Bucs O-line is normally really good, but the Saints D-line was the more dominant group. And the Eagles D-line has to be the more dominant group.
Yeah, it's a big part of this matchup for sure. Greg, we'll be back to break this all down next week. Win or loss, we'll be back next week to break it all down right here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade.
Hey, Eagles fans, get ready for the game each Sunday with an exclusive look at Eagles pregame warm-ups brought to you live each week when you join myself, Amy Campbell, and Eagles insider Dave Spadaro on the Kickoff Show presented by Exalta. We provide Eagles-focused analysis, late-breaking news, and the team perspective that you cannot get anywhere else. The Kickoff Show presented by Exalta can be seen live 50 minutes before kickoff on PhiladelphiaEagles.com, the Eagles mobile app, and the team's social media channels.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
Great stuff from Greg, who you can follow on Twitter, just like I do, at Greg Cosell. And while you're at it, I'm at Eagles XOs. That's where I post all the podcasts I'm a part of and all of our X's and O's content that we produce here with Eagles Entertainment. You know, I appreciate everybody that promotes this podcast on social media. That is one way to support the show. But the best way is to go on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. And I want to give a shout out today to someone who did exactly that. Pat left a 5-star review saying this podcast is for football junkies. It is great for any diehard Eagles fans who have a desire to learn more about the game of football. It's my favorite Eagles podcast because it is so educational. Pat, thank you so much for your support. Thanks so much for the 5-star rating. Great stuff from Pat, and thank you to them, and thank you to all of you out there for your continued support of this show and all the rest of our podcasts here with Eagles Entertainment. That being said, I think that'll do it. Another show in the books here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. For everybody here at the NovaCare Complex, I am Fran Duffy. We will talk to you later this week. When the clock hits all zeros, the game might be over, but the action is not. Join us for the post-game show presented by Rico for instant reaction. Watch live as Coach Nick Sirianni and Eagles players come to the podium and meet with the media. We will make sure you do not miss a word. Myself, Ike Reese, and Gabriella DiGiovanni will also break down the game live at the desk and hear from Eagles insider Dave Spadaro to get his thoughts. The post-game show presented by Rico can be seen on PhiladelphiaEagles.com, the Eagles mobile app, and the team's social media channels.